Hello, welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and not only is it soilless cultivation today, it's even growing media-less, because we are talking bioreactors and growing microalgae. So this is an interesting subject. Microalgae are not technically plants, but they photosynthesize, and so they will come under botany at the very least, and you grow them in greenhouses and grow rooms. So I'm going to talk about them because they'll be very similar, and I've got a tiny bit of experience when it comes to this because we've sold some fertilizers to some microalgae startup companies in the past, some raw materials. So we'll talk about that. So microalgae are tiny photosynthetic powerhouses. They're key for biofuels, wastewater treatment, nutritional supplements, and even hydroponic system integrations. So we'll talk about that. What is a bioreactor? So a bioreactor is a system that's designed to support living organisms, and they culture any microbe. They might come in an open system or a closed system. So an open system, these are often called raceway ponds, and you will see them. They're often popular in like Africa, in polytunnels, and the microalgae go around the tanks, and it looks a bit like a Formula One racetrack, or certainly an Indy racetrack, a bit simpler than a Formula One. And then you have closed photobioreactors, PBRs. These are sealed systems with precise environmental controls. They're a bit like the systems that are used for growing microbes in like microbiology for like antibiotic production. And they have like glass, but they have a glass outer system, and they have like propellers to move the solution around. And so it's a sealed system, and there might be long tubes in bigger systems, but the key is to move the algae around rather than leave them stagnant. That's not just to make sure that they get gas exchange and nutrient mix up and don't clump together. It's so that the light can penetrate, and there's a whole host of different reasons why you want to do that. So microalgae absorb CO2, they use water and light to grow rapidly, and high density systems can produce really high biomass if optimized, and that's the key. Some speeds can reach growth rates that far exceed terrestrial crop plants. But you obviously need to manage the light distribution, the CO2 that's dissolved in or bubbled through the water and mixed. The temperature, pH, and nutrient levels need to be optimized, and it has to be sterilized as well to prevent the growth of organisms that you don't want in there. Other types of algae and other bacteria and phages, they're viruses that affect bacteria and microalgae. What else could be in there? Any organism that's going to eat the microalgae, like protozoa, amoeba, you want to make sure they're not in there. So it gets really complicated very quickly, and you have to be a specialist in microalgae cultivation. Algenuity, I think that's a company based in like, say, Albans or Bedfordshire in the UK. They're experts in this, and they do things like they extract pigments from microalgae for use, high value pigments. Some of the pigments from microalgae costs can reach really high figures, like hundreds of thousands of dollars for a kilo of the pigments from microalgae. Omega fatty acids you can extract from microalgae rather than having to use animal products, or without having to use GM crops. That's a big source of omega fatty acids now. GM canola or oilseed rape. So I said you have the raceway ponds, the tubular bioreactors, flat plate or bubble columns where the column goes up into the air and you bubble CO2 and air through it, which helps with agitation as well. And foil-based or biopolymer sheet reactors, they're flexible, low-cost options. All depends on the scale and the application. For biomass and biofuels, oil-rich algae is obviously what you're after there. For biodiesel production and extraction, where up to 60% of the biomass can be oil. Obviously, you're going to need to have a massive energy efficient system for that. It's not going to be LED powered, is it? Because you want sunlight powered. Wastewater treatment. Some bioreactors can be used to clean up wastewater, remove nitrates and things like this, and can be integrated into hydroponic systems. I've not seen that done in real life. And then you've got advanced biotech systems that use genetically engineered algae to produce vaccines, enzymes, and even anti-cancer agents. And then if you think about it, some facilities can link algae bioreactors to flue gases out of factories to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really the golden ticket, isn't it? Imagine having a energy intensive system, like imagine a cement factory that produces colossal amounts of CO2, or a steel refinery, a steel, what do they call them? Furnace. That will produce vast amounts of CO2. And so could you link that to a biomass producing or even a high value producing microalgae production? Because, you've got super high growth rates, massive CO2 capture, minimal land use, low waste. And so, potentially massive. So what are the challenges? Light limitation. Algae is self-shading and reduces photosynthesis at high cell densities. So I said that movement of the algae is critical. Oxygen buildup in closed systems can inhibit the growth. Ironic, isn't it? The oxygen levels in the solution can build up. I guess eventually it could lead to an issue where the gases could be, you could have a fire risk. Contamination, that would be the biggest issue for me. In open ponds, reducing the purity, consistency. If you're using all that pumping, if you're using synthetic CO2 rather than flue gas, and temperature control, there can be lots of energy. And then how do you harvest it? There's going to be massive issues around biomass separation. Could you use membranes and mechanical separation? These have all been studied in great detail. There are books and books and books on this subject, and this is just a quick podcast episode. So don't expect to know everything about microalgae production, but maybe to whet your appetite. Obviously, hydroponics is key. There's a big link up between hydroponic feeds and microalgae feeds, and the nutrients that are required. Very similar nutrients are required for microalgae. You might find that there is a sodium requirement. Some of the microalgae might come from seawater, and they might need some sodium in there. So you could provide that with sodium nitrate or sodium chloride, so salt, or you could provide it as any other sodium salt that you want to provide. There are lots of different options if you want to, and they're a lot cheaper than potassium salts. So you could produce a fertigation solution. You could just add sodium nitrate to gold leaf or liquid gold, and away you go. You won't need to bother with A and B tanks, and make it a lot simpler. And obviously, it's going to be more akin to sort of deep water culture. So you might need to use things like sterilization systems to clean out the system every now and again. Some of the systems can be fairly large, as I said. Some of the raceways, sort of biomass levels you're looking at is like 10 grams per litre of solution, and they can capture 60 to 95% nitrogen and phosphorus that's put into them daily, which is massive. You wouldn't get that from a plant. And then the algae-rich effluent can be used to enhance zucchini seedling growth, so you could use it as a biostimulant. There is a lot of research in Spain, I believe, about microalgae use as sort of like freshwater algae as an alternative to seaweed biostimulants. One of my former bosses, Rye Wagner of Agrinas, he was the head of a company, or certainly, I think he was the CEO of a company in Spain that looked at algae as a biostimulant. I don't know if they're still going. They probably are. So it's a consistent, sodium-free, low environmental impact, potentially biostimulant. Chlorella is a human stimulant additive you'll find in grow shops, I think. Spirulina as well. That seems to ring a bell. Not sure if that's grown bioreactors. I think it probably is. Yeah, there's certainly lots to consider there. They're not just futuristic tech, although they will feature in a lot of films. A lot of sci-fi films you'll see bioreactors because they just look flipping brilliant. I mean, compared to a hydroponic systems look good and, are impressive, but bioreactors look 10 times that. If you want to look at bioreactors, then a good place to go, I don't know if they still got them, but there is a greenhouse in Cambridge University Botanical Gardens that contains bioreactors, and you can look at it from outside if you're a visitor to the gardens. I'm not sure if they're running, that you might be the day that you go there, everything's down and the project's not running. But if you're going to find a bioreactor, that's the place to go. Maybe email them and say just before you go to Cambridge, then you could go and look at the bioreactors there. And if you asked them and said you'd like to have a tour of the facilities, I'm sure they would be more than happy to give you a tour if you're sensible and positive and, not an idiot, because they get money from the government to help with plant science and spread, and help with industrial application of science and things like this. Cambridge University Botanical Gardens is my favourite botanical gardens in the UK, and that is saying something because there are some fantastic botanical gardens in the UK. Kew Gardens, obviously, and Wisley, the RHS Gardens. Edinburgh Botanical Gardens is great. Ness Botanical Gardens in Liverpool holds a special place in my heart. But I would, because that's what got me into plant science in the first place. Durham Botanical Gardens, because that used to be on my doorstep as a student. But Cambridge is brilliant because I like it because everything is logically set out in plant families. And a lot of them, like, they have weaving paths that take you on a journey and, all garden design and things like this, principles. Cambridge University, none of that, no garden design principles. Everything plant families is a block. There's a block of a bedding plot, and all the species of that family are in that bed. And then the next one is the next family, the next one is the next family. And you just go, brilliant, you just go around, and it's really easy to find. And there's an amazing teak wooden greenhouse there. And in the middle of winter, that's a great place to go. And I think it's just a fantastic place. Cambridge itself is a wonderful city. And you've got the bioreactors as well. It's got a fantastic cafe with really good food and coffee. And I used to take a load of students there when I was a lecturer. And I would say to them, right, we can either take the park and ride and lose 2 hours over a day, or we could illegally park on the double yellow lines outside the botanical gardens. And if we get a parking ticket, we all agree to share the cost of that parking ticket, which will be less than the park and ride. And all the students would say, yeah, let's do that. So we would park outside, and we never once got a parking ticket, but I did have to drive off very quickly when I saw a parking warden coming around the corner, and she was just about to write me a ticket. So yeah, definitely recommend Cambridge Botanical Gardens and their exhibits, which may or may not include microalgae when you go there. So, as I say, I am not an expert. There are lots of different types of microalgae and lots of experts on microalgae. There's lots of different types, like pigmented microalgae, purple microalgae. And you'll obviously need a microscope to study the different types. And there's diatoms as well. They have a silica body around them, so you'll need silicon nutrition. If you're going to grow certain types of microalgae, you'll need the sodium if you're going to seawater types. But yeah, that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. A sort of gentle introduction to bioreactors and microalgae. Maybe you're doing this already and you think I've missed something, got something wrong, or just massively glazed over the whole subject and there's loads more to it than what I've talked about. And I'm more than happy for you to send me the details and I'll do a follow-up episode about bioreactors. But that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. If you know somebody's into microalgae, send me this episode and ask them what they think of it. That would be great. And if you've had this episode shared with you, then you owe the person who shared it with you a very cold, nice drink. So get down to the pub or the bar or wherever you're located, or buy them an ice cream. That's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Until tomorrow, goodbye.